The I first sketched an image of Simon quite some time ago. I was listening to the Yog Pod where Simon and Lewis talk about what they'd look like in an animation. So I made a sketch of Simon, and I can remember being quite proud over the sketch. It sort of Simon looked quite alike the way he looked now. It looks now in the videos. Only for some reason I decided to give him a more sort of curly beard. I don't know why, but for some reason I thought that Simon seemed a bit curly. And but I think that my general inspiration for drawing Simon the way I draw him in terms of his face and his glasses and his hair and his beard and so on is that I like to think of Simon as being what would happen if you took an hobbit from the sort of peaceful little hole in the ground into the modern world and then forced them to act the part of a human. I think that's the best way of describing Simon, really. He is a peaceful little man living underground with his big, wonderful garden, and he has all these wonderful friends who come over to eat, big dinners, and then smoke their pipes, and just having a wonderful time. And then he is forced upon this to sort of deal with internet. He is forced to deal with video games that he, to some degree, enjoys, but he is also very bad at. So I sort of like that idea of Simon, and I think that science, and that is part of what makes Simon, my design for Simon. I think the other part is Winnie the Pooh, and specifically the Winnie the Pooh sort of in the Disney films, because Winnie the Pooh has a very sort of specific posture, and this is a sort of posture that comes about by having this big sort of tummy, big stomach, and he has also a sweater, actually a t-shirt that is slightly too small, so his sort of stomach becomes quite noticeable. And I think that subconsciously influenced me in the design of Simon, designing him sort of like a human Winnie the Pooh Hobbit with an obsession of Jaffa cakes instead of an obsession of honey. Lewis, on the other hand, being the straight man in the double act, and also being sort of a scientific journalist and chemist, should feel a bit more sort of proper, should feel more organized. And I think that my idea of Lewis is that Lewis should feel like a handsome, sort of very intelligent, very wholesome person. He, in the new designs I made, he's wearing sort of a cardigan. He sits sort of very straight. He has a very good posture. He crosses his legs. He has his arms in his lap. He does sort of square glasses. He looks much more, compared to Simon altogether, and he looks far more comfortable as a modern day human. And I think that's really the difference between the comedic exaggeration of Simon versus the comedic exaggeration of Lewis, is that Lewis is a man of enlightenment, and Simon is more of a sort of simple farmer type person, which is great for a double act. In a more sort of technical aspect of the design, Simon consists mostly of circles, unlike Lewis, who consists mostly of squares. If you look at the design for Lewis, his head is a square, his nose is a square, his glasses are square, and his body is a square. Compared to Simon, whose head is a circle, his glasses are circles, his nose is a circle, and his sort of general body is a circle. This is sort of it's quite simple way of making a difference between the funny man, which is Simon, and the straight man, which is Lewis, it is probably the easiest way to visually make a difference. And then you also then try to make a difference in what they wear and what they surround themselves with. Lewis, of course, as true to the Yog Pod, eats his Jaffa cakes from a plate. He also has quite a sort of stylish computer. He has a cup of tea, and he sits as I said, has a good posture and everything. Whereas Simon sort of sits a bit more sort of hunched back in his chair. He has a kettle of tea instead of just a cup of tea, and his Jaffa cakes lie sort of strewn on the table, and there's sort of crumbs around his case, and his computer is of course a laptop that has a crack in it, and that he tried to repair. So it's sort of a very easy way of making the difference between the characters, and it's something that's very fun to do. It's very fun to sort of design a character that way, and then of course you take it to some sort of ridiculous points where if you've seen the D&D animations, Hannah makes an appearance with her room, and of course everything is very girlified. She has flowers, she has a necklace around her microphone, she even has a spray can which says girl spray on it. I don't know what girl spray is. That's a very lazy decision that I've noticed that a lot of people actually paid attention to and commented about it. With the new designs, I decided to remove Simon Lewis from their rooms and put them in the same room. To some degree, there was less things to design, but it's also it's a lot more entertaining. And the biggest difference between Simon and Lewis here is that, of course, Simon is barefoot. Actually, not barefoot. He's wearing socks, but he's not wearing shoes, and he's sitting on a very comfortable armchair. Whereas Lewis sits on a sort of modern type of chair, and he has shoes, and he sits cross-legged, which goes just to try and show the difference. Yet again, this is the difference between the straight man and the funny man. But in the end, my whole style for drawing the animations, or drawing the videos, whatever you want to call them, my style is very haphazard. I don't really put much thought into what I draw or how I draw it. I sort of just draw whatever comes to mind, and that usually is what leads to the sort of strange contrasts between Simon and Lewis characters, which both look quite cartoony, and someone like Brian Blessed comes in looking quite a lot more realistic, and that sort of came about simply because you need to sort of recognize the celebrity. You need to recognize who they are, and it's quite fun to sort of draw a quite realistic celebrity. It's sort of the same problem that happened to if you look. I suppose this comparison isn't really justified, but it's the comparison I'm going to make. If you look at something like The Simpsons, which is about on the same level as my animations, you notice that one of the big problems The Simpsons had is that when they sort of started introducing real celebrities as guest stars, what would happen is that the guest stars needed to look like the guest star, because otherwise there's little point in actually having a guest star. So when compared to Homer, where it is this absurd character, he has very sort of absurd 5 o'clock shadow, he has sort of very strange haircut, and then you compare it, then you put it next to one of the most guest stars from the more recent episodes, and it just looks so strange. It's a sort of the same thing that happened with these videos. But I think that by now that sort of doesn't happen quite anymore. It isn't quite as extreme as Winter's Coming, where you had this sort of very kind of realistically drawn Boromir next to a very sort of haphazardly, sloppily drawn Simon and Lewis.